Before we begin, please be advised that the material you are about to hear may be inappropriate or disturbing for some viewers. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. The content presented has not been exaggerated or taken out of context. It reflects the actual statements made by the prosecution defense and Mia on June 2, 2025. Some portions have been censored to comply with YouTube's guidelines. You will hear a narrated summary of Mia's testimony from the trial of Sean Diddy Combs. Source: Courtroom Reporter, Inner City Press, XCOM. All parties involved are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Proceed with caution. As the courtroom doors swung open and the jury filed in, a notable stillness fell over the room. For days, the trial of Sean Diddy Combs had been building, a slow crescendo of accusations, counterarguments, and chilling recollections from witnesses whose lives had once orbited the center of power, fame, and control. Now, it was Mia's turn to take the stand. Her name had lingered on the edge of earlier testimonies, mentioned but not fully explored. A former assistant, she had once operated within Combs' inner circle, close enough to witness the machinery of his world from the inside. That morning, she was called under subpoena, and before she even spoke, the air was charged with anticipation. She would be testifying under an immunity order, granted just moments earlier after a short legal exchange between the prosecution and the judge. There would be no Fifth Amendment shield now. Mia was expected to speak, and the court was ready to listen. What followed was not a dramatic outburst or fiery accusation. Instead, Mia's testimony unfolded slowly, cautiously, and with the quiet weight of someone who had lived through difficult years, storing everything but rarely speaking of it. Dressed professionally but plainly, Mia answered the initial questions from Combs' defense attorney, Mr. Steele, with simplicity and restraint. "Do you speak up for yourself?" he asked. "No," she replied almost without hesitation. It was a revealing beginning. Mia was not presenting herself as a bold challenger or a forceful whistleblower, but when asked if she empowered others, she said yes. The contrast was striking, and the message clear. She was someone who worked behind the scenes, offering strength to others while perhaps never fully claiming her own. Mr. Steele began slowly peeling back the layers of her history with Combs. They talked about her departure from his employment in 2017, which she confirmed. He referenced her old text messages, asking her to confirm their tone and authenticity. "I sound like me," she said, acknowledging them without resistance. Her recollections were calm, though occasionally uncertain. Dates were fuzzy. Names came hesitantly, but her core responses were steady. They moved to her early years. Mia had attended James Madison University, she confirmed. She had worked as a design assistant, taking on a wide range of tasks that gradually expanded over time. What started as an ordinary assistant job evolved into something much more personal and intense. Round-the-clock support, as Steele phrased it. She nodded. He listed examples: managing professional and personal needs, organizing travel, and eventually handling travel documents and passports. Then came one of the more significant exchanges. "You said they had your passport," Steele began. "They had everyone's passport, true?" "Yes," Mia confirmed. The courtroom paused. In that moment, it wasn't just a detail, it was a symbol. Control over someone's passport suggests control over their freedom. It painted a picture of an environment where personal autonomy wasn't guaranteed, even in the small things. Steele, trying to reshape the narrative, asked if she was a strong person. She hesitated. "I'm good at teaching people," she said, "not necessarily at enforcing things." When he asked if she considered herself a leader, her reply was quiet and uncertain. "I don't know about that." Mia wasn't defensive. She wasn't dramatic. She didn't appear to have a rehearsed story. Her testimony was measured, modest, and in that, possibly all the more believable. She wasn't there to paint herself as a victim or a savior. She was simply telling the truth as she remembered it. The court was briefly interrupted by procedural back and forth about a piece of video evidence. The defense objected to the courtroom viewing an elevator hallway video, arguing it had been altered to show Combs moving 30% faster than he actually had. It's prejudicial, they claimed. The judge agreed, for now, asking that the video not be shown until proper foundation was laid. Mr. Steele pressed forward with his cross-examination. He introduced what appeared to be a copy of Mia's resume. It mentioned skills like multitasking, having thick skin, and being able to handle difficult situations 24/7. She didn't remember writing it, but admitted it looked like something she might have submitted. The judge allowed it into evidence. What Steele seemed to be doing was walking a fine line. On one hand, he tried to frame Mia as someone competent, experienced, and able to withstand pressure, perhaps to suggest that if anything troubling had happened, she would have spoken up. On the other hand, Mia's soft-spoken answers undercut that. She never claimed to have fought back. She never claimed to have power. Her responses made it clear that even capable, intelligent people can find themselves in environments they don't control, where speaking out simply doesn't feel like an option. Later, in another exchange, Steele pressed her about her travel responsibilities. She initially said she didn't remember traveling extensively, but when reminded that she had traveled with Combs companies, she responded with a simple, "Oh, yes." The moment, like many others in her testimony, reinforced a subtle, but telling, truth. Memories may blur, but the feeling of having been part of something intense, and perhaps overwhelming, remains. Before Mia's testimony began that day, there had even been a moment of levity in the courtroom. Judge Subramanian asked how long Mr. Steele planned to continue the cross-examination. "At least until lunch, maybe after," Steele answered. The judge, aware of how quickly moments from the courtroom were appearing on social media, asked dryly, "We're not going to have 15 more Instagram posts?" Steele smiled. "I can't promise that." It was a rare, light moment in an otherwise heavy proceeding. But once Mia was on the stand, the room returned to its serious tone. By the end of her testimony, the court hadn't heard any dramatic accusations or emotional breakdowns. Instead, they heard from someone who had lived quietly inside a world where power moved silently and constantly, where personal boundaries were often blurry, and where loyalty could coexist with fear. Mia wasn't sure if she was a leader. She wasn't sure she'd written her resume. She wasn't sure when she started working for Combs, but she was sure of the feeling that travel documents weren't always her own, that support meant being on call 24/7, and that her role was to help others, even if it meant disappearing into the background. And sometimes it's the quietest voices that speak the loudest truths. As Mia remained seated in the witness chair, the tone of the courtroom began to shift. Mr. Steele, attorney for Sean "Diddy" Combs, pressed further, this time using Mia's own words and digital traces to raise questions about her credibility and the nature of her past relationship with Combs. He presented text messages, asking her to read them aloud. One from May 14, 2020, addressed to Combs, read, "My heart is broken about Dree. In my spirituality, I know that when people are done with the physical world, it's that they have completed their mission. I love you." The message was affectionate, intimate even. Steele leaned in. If Combs had treated her as badly as earlier testimony had implied, why would she write that? Mia did not flinch, but the discomfort in the courtroom was palpable. She didn't deny the words, nor did she offer excuses. It was part of a complicated dynamic she never fully tried to justify. Steele continued this line of questioning with, "Your other emotional messages from Mia to Combs. One for Christmas 2018 where she wrote, 'Merry Christmas, I love you,' after attending Kim Porter's funeral. Another from 2019 referencing a nightmare and thanking Combs for saving her." He even showed a 2020 message where Combs wrote back, "Glad you're well, love. Please send me the footage for the doc." Steele's strategy became clear. He aimed to undermine the perception of fear or trauma, pointing instead to warm, friendly messages and collaborative exchanges. If Combs was abusive, why was Mia expressing love, sending holiday greetings, helping him with projects? Why wasn't there evidence of resistance or distance? But Mia countered, not with defensiveness, but with psychological complexity. "It's psychological," she said. 5 months after Kim's death is not a lot. Her responses pointed not to deception, but to a reality many trauma survivors face. Relationships aren't always binary. Abuse can exist in parallel with attachment, history, or emotional confusion. When pressed about whether she ever recorded Combs during moments of aggression, Mia responded, "I would not have been allowed to record that." She explained that it would have violated confidentiality agreements. Steele asked whether she had any digital record of Combs berating her. She again answered plainly, "No, not because it didn't happen, but because she wasn't allowed to document it." Steele probed further, asking about Mia's role in filming videos, such as one showing an audition for the James Brown biopic. She explained that she had been required to carry a camera, that it was part of her duties before smartphones were widespread. He continued asking about whether she had saved messages or clips that might show mistreatment. Mia said the only relevant text shown during her direct examination was one where Combs said, "Fam, skit, let's go to war." She added that her messages primarily involved coordinating with others in the office or trying to understand what others had seen. She acknowledged that her phone didn't contain a clear smoking gun, just fragments of a broader environment. Steele tried one final angle. "Mia, didn't you have time away from Mr. Combs to write, 'Today, he sexually assaulted me'?" Mia replied firmly, "I did not have time, and I would not have written that." The unspoken and the psychological. The heart of the defense's attack was clear. Mr. Steele wanted to sow doubt. If Mia had continued working with Combs, texting him warmly, sending him files, and showing no written outrage, how could she now claim harm or trauma? But Mia's responses painted a more nuanced picture. She spoke not in legal absolutes, but in emotional and psychological shades. She repeatedly acknowledged that her experience was not linear, not simple. Her references to psychology weren't evasions. They were reflections of how difficult it had been to process years of service, proximity, and blurred lines of power. She never claimed to have escaped fully. In fact, she seemed to admit that even years later, Combs' influence lingered, in her mind, in her emotions, in her decision to reach out during holidays, funerals, and professional moments. Steele concluded by questioning her loyalty, her timeline, and her silence. But Mia never collapsed under the pressure. She gave calm answers, even when facing invasive questions about trauma, loyalty, and complex memory. As her time on the stand drew to a close, what became clear wasn't a perfectly clean narrative, but rather one that reflected the emotional messiness of life inside a powerful and isolating system.